One question, two views. You decide.
For this explainer, we're zeroing in on one of the weirdest parts, the rain links. I mean, they're just astronomically long. So the big question is, are these numbers just mistakes, maybe typos from ancient scribes, or were they designed that way on purpose? One view says it's just a natural result of their math and centuries of copying. The other view? It says every single number was calculated to send a message. To figure this out, we're going to walk through three key arguments. All right, let's lay out the two sides. First, you've got the historical memory view. This camp basically says the scribes who wrote this were acting like historians. They were doing their best to record these ancient traditions that were passed down. And those crazy long reigns, they weren't making them up. It's just a side effect of their weird math system and, the fact that these stories were copied and recopied for centuries. But then you have the political construction view. This side says, no. These scribes were more like political spin doctors. They intentionally crafted these numbers as part of a sophisticated code to legitimize certain rulers and ideas about power. Okay, first up, math versus meaning. This gets right to the heart of it. Are we looking at a quirky byproduct of how the Sumerians did their arithmetic, or is there a hidden message, a deliberate pattern, baked into the numbers themselves? And just look at what we're talking about here. These are the kings before the Great Flood. We're not talking a few centuries, we're talking tens of thousands of years. Ululam is on the throne for 28,800 years, and Menluana, a whopping 43,200 years. I mean, these numbers just feel impossible, right? And how you explain them? Well, that's everything in this debate. So how in the world do you explain this? Well, view 1 says it's all about the math. The Sumerians used a base 60 system, totally different from our base 10. And these huge, neat numbers are just what you get. But view 2 looks at this and says, no way. These numbers aren't random artifacts. They're too clean, too perfect. This has to be a deliberate design. Let's dig into view 1's idea for a second. We count in tens, right? So 100, 1,000, those are nice round numbers to us. Well, the Mesopotamians counted in 60s. A huge unit for them was 3,600, which is just 60 times 60. So from that perspective, a number like 36,000 isn't some cosmic mystery. It's literally just 10 units of 3,600, and 28,800 is 8 units of 3,600. See? The argument is that these weren't symbolic numbers. They were just numbers, the result of scribes using their everyday math. But view 2 comes back with a really strong counterpoint. They say, hold on a minute, look closer. It's not just that they're big round numbers. There's a pattern. You get 3 kings who reigned for exactly 28,800 years, 2 for exactly 36,000. And check out the math. 28,800 is 8 times 3,600. Then 36,000 is 10 times 3,600. Then 43,200 is 12 times 3,600. That's a perfect progression. To the folks in this camp, that's just too tidy to be an accident. This isn't just counting. This is careful, deliberate design. And this is maybe the knockout punch for view 2. Let's jump forward in time, like 1,500 years later. There's this Babylonian priest, Berossos, and he writes his own history. And guess what? For his own ancient kings, he uses the exact same mathematical system of multiplying by 3,600. The argument here is, what are the odds? He wouldn't just accidentally invent the same quirky system. No, he must have recognized it for what it was, a meaningful, intentional code, a tradition so important that he had to preserve it himself. All right, let's move on to argument number 2, sources versus strategy. This whole debate hinges on a really sudden change. After the Great Flood, the numbers in the King List changed dramatically. They just plummet from impossible to, well, almost plausible. The big question is, why? You can really see it here. I mean, it's like falling off a cliff. Before the flood, the average reign is over 30,000 years. The very first king after the flood, his reign drops to 1,200 years. Still crazy long, but a huge drop. Then fast forward a bit to guys we actually know from history like Sargon of Akkad. His reign is listed as 56 years. And Shulgi is 46 years. And we can actually check those later numbers against other records. So what gives? What explains this nosedive into reality? So, surprise, surprise, we've got 2 totally different explanations. View 1 says it's pretty simple. Their sources got better. As they got closer to their own time, they had actual written records to work from, so they had to stick to the facts. But view 2 sees something much more clever going on. They think the scribes used real numbers where they knew people could check them, as a strategy to make the whole document, including the unbelievable parts, seem trustworthy. So if you're in the historical memory camp, this shift is actually a sign of authenticity. I mean, think about it. If the scribes were just making this all up from scratch, why not keep all the reigns legendary and huge? The fact that they didn't suggests they were just honestly recording what they had to work with. For the super old kings, they had these epic, inflated oral traditions. For the more recent kings, they had boring administrative records. This shift shows they were preserving what they had, not just inventing a story. But View 2 argues this is a brilliant propaganda move. The composers knew that anyone reading this could probably go and check the reign length of a famous king like Sargon. If they got that number wrong, the whole list would look like a joke, so they were super careful to be accurate where they could be fact-checked. And that accuracy creates a kind of halo effect. A reader thinks, well, they got Sargon right, so I guess those 30,000-year reigns for the ancient kings must be right too. It's using a little bit of truth to sell a whole lot of myth. And that brings us to our third and final argument: errors versus edits. See, we don't have just one perfect copy of the Sumerian King List. We have a bunch of different versions, and they don't all agree. So the question is, are these differences just copying mistakes that piled up over time, or are they intentional edits with a purpose? Let's look at the perfect case study, a guy named Ziusudra. You can think of him as the Sumerian Noah. He's the hero who survives the Great Flood. Now, in one of our most important manuscripts, he's right there, the last king before the flood. But in another equally important manuscript, poof, he's just gone. Not a typo, not a misspelled name. He's been completely erased from the list. So what does the change that big tell us? Well, for View 1, this is exactly what you'd expect. It's just proof of error and confusing. If these numbers were part of some sacred, unchangeable code, you'd think the scribes would have been way more careful. The fact that the lists are messy proves they weren't preserving a perfect pattern. But for View 2, these aren't mistakes at all. They're deliberate edits, made to support a specific agenda. View 1's take is that this is just what happens to information over time. It's like that game of telephone, right? You whisper a message down the line, and by the time it gets to the end, it's completely garbled. For centuries, scribes were copying these lists by hand. Maybe they misread a symbol. Maybe they tried to fix something they thought was a mistake. The fact that the totals don't even add up across different manuscripts just shows that nobody was treating this as a fixed, sacred code. It's just messy history. But View 2 has a much more targeted explanation. Why on earth would a scribe delete Ziusudra? Well, here's the thing about Ziusudra. After the flood, the gods made him immortal. He doesn't die. And that really complicates the main message of the King List, which is that kingship was totally wiped out by the flood and had to be sent down from heaven all over again. An immortal king messes up that clean break. So by taking him out, a scribe creates a much cleaner, more powerful political story. It wasn't a typo. It was a strategic cut to make the ideology strong. So there we go. We've looked at the evidence from 3 completely different angles. Let's do a quick recap of the big questions before turning it over to you. So it all boils down to this. First, are those giant numbers just a quirk of Sumerian math, or are they a meaningful, constructed pattern? Second, does the sudden shift to realistic reigns happen because the scribes got better sources, or was it a clever strategy to build credibility? And third, are the differences between the manuscripts just copying errors over time, or are they deliberate surgical edits? We've seen the case for historical memory and the case for political construction. And as always, here's where we stop, because we don't take a position, it's your turn. So what do you think? Were these incredible numbers just the product of a forgotten math system and centuries of scribal mistakes? Or were they a carefully crafted code designed from the very beginning to send a message about power and the gods? Errors or intentional design? What's your take? Drop your view in the comments below. And hey, if there's a question you want us to tackle next, let us know.